Just a couple of announcements here. This is actually a bonus lecture, and we're super happy to have the opportunity to have Professor Brown here. Typically, the lectures are on the third Thursday of each month, and I just wanted to briefly tell you about. It'll be 2 weeks from today. The lecture is Beauty in Bronze, Carl Millis in America. And so we have the curator of collections from the Cranbrook Academy coming, Gregory Whitcott, to talk about Carl Millis, whose 3 bronze angels are out in the Garden of Reflection. And Millis spent 26 years at Cranbrook Academy, and really a huge body of his work is represented there at Cranbrook. So really excited to have Greg coming to talk about Carl Millis and his influence on contemporary sculpture. And then the November lecture will be yours truly, doing a season in review. So some nice things coming up in the garden. We have moon viewing tea ceremony. You can check that out on our garden website. We'll be here on the 27th?
8th, I think.
28th?
I think it's the same day as the holiday.
As Spooktacular.
Yeah, that's Saturday.
That's Saturday the 28th.
It's 20.
Okay, so check that out. It'll be after the Spooktacular, but that'll be really a phenomenal event with bamboo flute and music and Ikebana exhibition, and then of course Professor Akimi Kabunji with the moon viewing tea ceremony. So check that out. That'll be really wonderful. So we're really happy to have Professor Brown here, a longtime friend of Anderson Japanese Garden and a great personal friend. You know, Ken has done so many things, but a professor of Asian art history at California State Long Beach. He's published actively in several areas of Japanese art, as well as on Japanese style gardens in North America, and we have a couple of his books up in the gift shop here at the garden. Curated many exhibitions and museums, exploring topics from modern woodblock printing to Art Deco and lacquer makers' tools. Also, key co-founder of the North American Japanese Garden Association and past president of that organization, which has really blossomed into a really fine organization. He was on the board from 2012 to 2017. Really happy to have Ken here. Please give a welcome to Ken Brown.
Thank you, Tim. It reminded me when I was president of North American Japanese Garden Association, Tim was secretary, and despite what you might hear, I never chased him around the office. Total, false narrative. At any rate, it's a pleasure to be here. When I was scheduled, sort of fit in, but a great Whitcup in 2 weeks will be a great lecture. He'll wave his hands even more than I do, but I mean, knowledge, insight, humor, that is really going to be a treat. I could listen to him talk for days. At any rate, when Tim scheduled me on Thursday night, I did check that the Bears are playing on Thursday night football, and I thought, uh-oh. But as the season progressed, I just thought, oh. Thank you for coming, because there's other things you could do on a Thursday night. This is an unusual lecture for me. I am now officially retired from California State University, Long Beach, where I've taught for 25 years, seems like more, but I publish on 2 things: Japanese art history, painting, prints, other stuff, and gardens. And until tonight, I never mixed my 2 streams. So last night in Chicago in the hotel bed at 2 in the morning, I had an epiphany. This is like a Reese's peanut butter cup. The chocolate and the peanut butter, the art history and the garden history are coming together. So we'll see if you like the Reese's peanut butter cup. Does it work? These things that I've kept separate in my whole life. I'm an art historian, I put on the garden history. They're meeting tonight. So what Japanese and Chinese paintings tell us about how to enjoy Japanese gardens? That's the theme. Can we look at Japanese and Chinese paintings and learn something about the enjoyment of gardens? And I think you're going to already know all the answers. So really, I'm going to just hopefully deepen what you already know. And why do you already know most of the things that I'm going to say in this lecture? because you're friends and supporters of the Anderson Japanese Gardens, which is a leadership garden, and what they have done in terms of the garden, the education, now the website, the events, are so far ahead of most gardens that you already know this insight. I think you do. I'm going to use their website to start. So basic, the outline, and there is a quiz after. See how you do. So basically, my thesis statement is East Asian paintings are models for what people did and should do, wanted to do, imagined doing in gardens. And that idea that we might think, well, gardens are kind of nature, and human reactions to nature are inherent, intuitive, unchanging. There's a degree of truth, but gardens are acculturated nature. And we learn through culture how to enjoy them. So I think we can learn from the past about how to enjoy gardens now and into the future. As you'll soon find out, very few Chinese and Japanese paintings actually show real historic gardens. And when they do, they focus on the gardens as property, not enjoying the property, but the status of the owner. However, there's a whole genre in East Asian painting called landscape painting. And landscape painting typically shows idealized nature. It doesn't so much show an actual place. It's not topographic about the topography, but it's about landscape in the abstract. And landscape painting, unlike garden painting, focuses on ideal human interactions with landscape. So that's going to be our subject ad nauseum. So we're going to explore these things in the next 3 hours. I usually just 2 hours. Okay, now, all right. So this is why you already know my key points. So this is from the wonderful Anderson Japanese Garden website, the impact of nature. Well, gardens are acculturated nature. They promote physical activity, which helps us focus. It lessens aggression. You can all read, I'm not going to go over this. It improves your mood, strong sense of well-being. You all know that because the Anderson Garden is such a model physically and in its programs of that. And people historically in East Asia knew that, and it comes out in their paintings, as we will see. Another great part of the Anderson new and improved website is the use of space, East Asian sort of sense of space, compositional arrangement, that so-called empty space or negative space. And I'm going to show you a lot of paintings, and you're going to see these principles of putting trees on the diagonal and empty space. And kind of less is more. We don't need plants everywhere, just a few. This is an autumn painting of chrysanthemums. Just one little bunch of chrysanthemums, a few well-placed stones, that's the space. So as I go through these paintings, I'm going to talk about the content, but you'll also be noticing, wow, these paintings look a lot like the Anderson Garden. I can see this principle of empty space, of simplicity, of asymmetry, of intervals and voids. But you'll already be well attuned, so I'm preaching to the converted. Okay, part one, we finished the intro. Are there paintings of gardens in East Asia? There are, and I'm going to show some 18th and 19th century Japanese gardens. This is the Tokugawa, the shoguns, their Akasaka garden called Aoyama Enso. I'm going to show you 2 paintings of it. The first is a very Chinese-y painting, and you can barely really get a sense of the garden. And this is just kind of showing off the status of the warlord, the daimyo, by showing their property, and in this case showing it in a very Chinese-y, a so-called literati style of Chinese. It'd be like, European culture, people who read Latin, the Chinese literati culture in Japan. So this painting is really not telling us much about the garden, but it's telling us about the status of the people who had a garden and could have it pictorialized in an old, elite Chinese style. Next photo is the same garden, now painted in a totally different way, showing the Japanese aristocratic heritage that these warlords also wanted to show off through their garden. This is the exact same garden as the one I just showed you, but it's really about the painting style. So now people are enjoying the garden music, in the garden in parties, but in neither painting do we really learn much about what the garden looked like. We learn that gardens were property and status. There are some paintings, these are mainly 19th century, which are kind of visual maps. And East Asian maps, you turn them around. So you look at the north, and then you kind of stand over here and look at the east, and then turn it and look at the south. But these are just sort of diagrams, maps of the garden, and they don't really certainly have any people. They don't have any people in them, and they don't really tell us much about enjoyment. So this is sort of like a schematic plan. And this is a little easier to read with recession in space, middle ground, foreground, background, volume. But still, there's no people in this garden. It's just a kind of like aerial bird's eye view. Look, there's a Mount Fuji over there, and there's 3 islands and bridges and a big viewing pavilion. And this painting, which is mid-19th century, is about as detailed as we're going to get for how should the plants look and what are the stone arrangements. But in all of these paintings, we don't see humans enjoying gardens in any dramatic way. So if we're going to learn about how the East Asian paintings tell us about enjoyment of gardens, we can't look at garden paintings. So we're going to look at idealized landscape painting. That's going to be our focus. And often landscape painting, it's not pure landscape, it's humans in landscape. We'll see annual ritual events. We'll see seasonal things like cherry blossom viewing and lots of parties. And then we'll see historical reenactments. We have Civil War reenactors. They had reenactments of 3rd century Chinese parties in gardens. This guy, Wang Shizhi, his orchid pavilion drinking party was reenacted across East Asia in hundreds of gardens. I probably showed this slide here before, but one point I want to make here pretty much at the beginning is that gardens were very social spaces. If you've sort of studied garden history, everybody talks about the sakuteki, this mid-11th century, text on the saku making of tei gardens, landscapes, and everybody talks about the first paragraph. Oh, you have to be aware of the place and the property and memories of nature, be aware of the old masters, be aware of the taste of the master of the house. But nobody talks about the second paragraph, the second line, which is on the back of the island, and all these gardens have big islands. A space for musicians should be as big as 21 to 24 meters. And if you look at, and that of course tells us that what we don't see in this recreation of a garden, the island, is there was a big place, this is the island, where the musicians, these are drums. So just to make that clear, well, these are diaries from court nobles talking about what did they do in gardens? Well, they got in small boats. And the sound of playing flutes behind the central island where there was the space for the musicians. More boats playing flutes. The imperial boating party by moonlight, the sound of the wave, the strings, the voice of the waterfall, the lapping of the waves, and the waterfall together with the instruments. So gardens are deeply places for social enjoyment, which is often sonic to the ear as much as visual to the eye. And with that little bit of knowledge, we then look at paintings of activities in gardens. Oh, there's the little, and this is another painting that shows this is the little stand, temporary stand, and these are drums, and this big almond-shaped thing we see the top of is the top of the drum. It was sort of like a reverberation chamber, and that's what we're seeing here. So, and you can now almost hear the sound of the drums, the flutes, the stringed instruments, the wavelets. So activities, music, gardens are places of complex human enjoyment. Not always. These are 2 paintings by the same Tosa family of artists in the 16th century, and often you're cherry blossom viewing to the sound of drums and people dancing, or you can be without music. But both were okay. They were options. All right, so gardens as historical events, as seasonal viewing, often with music. Historic gardens are a place where you connect with your ancestors or your culture heroes by reenacting the things they did. So I'm going to show you many versions of this painting. In the 3rd century in China, a guy named Wang Shizhi and his 2 sons invited their 51 closest friends to come over and have a party, and they had a meandering stream that ran by their purple orchid pavilion. And they played a game where they would call out the name of one of their friends, okay, Mr. Wu, and he had to write a poem, and it had to be on a certain theme, and it had to be a certain number of stanzas and rhyme scheme. and they'd say, go, and he had to start to write his poem, and then they would float a cup of wine down to him, and when the wine got to him, he had to stop writing his poem, read whatever he had, and if it wasn't perfect in stanzas and rhyme, he had to then drink the cup of wine as a penalty. And of course, that was the whole point, to get drunk. And this activity, the meandering stream garden, was repeated over and over again in China, Korea, and Japan. This is, in fact, one of the oldest extant Japanese gardens from the 8th century in the imperial palace of the Nara period. That's 8th century. It's been recreated. And this is another garden in Kyoto by the famous Nakane Kinsaku in this Heian style, 11th century style, 12th century style, in which they created the meandering stream garden, and Japanese every year reenact this famous event. So this social activities, drinking, literature, enjoying the garden, sitting on the ground, getting together, and these are paintings which show, such a common theme in Chinese, Korean, Japanese painting, the meandering. So here is the stream, here is the poets, their friends, the wine cups, everybody getting plastered. So. Activities, my students love that story for some reason. They practice that part of Asian culture. So activities in gardens in China is going to be our now, because those meandering stream gardens starts in China, goes across Asia. So in China, lots of dragon boat festivals in gardens, annual event in May, the 5th month, historical reenactments like the Purple Orchid Pavilion Lanting, literary gatherings. So Chinese emperors had a lot of money, and they built huge estates on lakes and reservoirs, and every May they would have dragon races. This is a 13th century painting, well, many copies of it in museums around the world, showing the imperial garden and the dragon boats that were going to have races, and people would bet on them. And these Chinese customs were copied in Japan. In fact, it's called the Mifune. It's every May in Japan now, and they have musicians playing flutes and drums, go out on boats and have races. This is, of course, you already know it, the meandering stream garden. And then another Chinese very common theme, and this is going to really segue into the rest of the lecture, gatherings, literary gatherings, men and women of literature and interest in literature and the humanities, we could call it, get together in gardens and enjoy themselves in various ways. One thing you could do in a garden was look at artworks. We now go into the museum to look at art, and the garden is separate. But they merged these spaces. And this is a painting by the artist Du Jing from the Ming Dynasty, 15th century. This is the inscription up here, which actually says, enjoying antiquities. This is what they're looking at, old bronzes and jades, and servants are bringing out more things to look at. One boy is looking at butterflies and flowers. He's a little lost. Somebody's bringing out paintings and calligraphy scrolls. And in the inscription, it says that when you look at art, you can almost hear music. The patterns, the designs, again, music coming into all things. And a day without ritual and music is a day where humanity falls from grace. So this is our very humanity, to enjoy each other's company, bring the past into the present through old artworks, and do it all in a garden-like space with a wall, fence, planted plants, just Chinese Taihu garden stones. And we see lots of these variety of literary gatherings. So scholars getting together, looking at paintings, probably this is the scribe writing down their comments. As the servants bring the paintings, they roll them up, they unroll them, they enjoy them, but they enjoy them more in the garden setting. Or you can be a little less literary and just enjoy drinking. So we'll see a lot of pots of wine and wine being poured. They're heating the wine over here. This detail is, and then the scholars sitting and drinking at night. These are candle stands and gardens in the evening. Those who heard me lecture before, you know I'm a big proponent that only the gardeners in East Asia went into the garden at noon. The people who went to enjoy the garden, not to work into it, went in the evening. Or at dusk, and so we'll see candles over and over in gardens for nocturnal events. All right, next major point. Activities in landscapes could be more generic, not specific parties or reenactments or seasonal events, but just kind of generic activities in landscape. Now you're thinking this isn't a garden, and it isn't. This is a, quote, landscape painting, in Japanese, a sansuizu. shan shui tu in Chinese, pardon my bad Chinese, which is a mountains and water picture. And landscape is a construct. This isn't real nature. This is idealized nature, and it's very much in that style that we're calling the appreciation of Ma, void, empty space, composition on diagonals, areas of activity, then areas of emptiness or where your eye can rest. Also the golden mist is rest, and obviously these compositions that are also a journey. There's the destination, the pavilion, there's the path, the servant or friends coming to visit. So although these are not gardens per se, these were gardens. They have walls, fences. I'm going to now focus on landscape, but second part of my thesis is landscape is really like a garden. It's idealized nature. And I think many people, Tim, others who work here might hopefully back me up on this. You probably have a number of visitors who think more or less this garden is just a little manicuring of a nature that was here. There was a waterfall. There were streams to some degree. And so I think these landscape paintings are like gardens in that they're constructs. I mean, here's the West Waterfall being constructed, all the plants and boulders being brought in, the streams being created, the cement being poured. You know, so just as a garden is a very artificial construction of an idealized nature, so too are these landscape paintings. They're creations of a nature that is conducive to our better selves. So that's the idealization of nature. So we're going to look at activities in these idealized landscape, these garden-like settings of water and mountains. And a very common subject in China, but not at all in Japan, so I'm not going to talk about it, is farewell paintings. Saying farewell to a government official or a business person who has to go to another posting. Japanese didn't have that custom until recently, so they didn't do farewell paintings. But Chinese subjects in landscape, human activities in landscape that really transferred from China to Japan are convivial retreats. This was my dissertation topic, my first book. I use the term aesthetic reclusion. People pretend to be recluses, hermits, but not to get away from, not for religious reasons or personal grief, but to embrace nature and friendships in nature. I would now call this hermitopia, the utopia of being a hermit. If I could rewrite my dissertation. So we'll see images of convivial retreat, friendly disconnection from the world in order to connect to nature, to your friends, to art and literature and music, and to your better self. And so what do people do in these convivial retreats, this hermitopia? They have banquets, they eat and drink, they sit quietly, they display their virtue by removing themselves from the world, and they create an idealized studio in which they imagine they could live. And I always imagine that I could live in the Anderson guest house. That's in times I'm sitting in the doctor's office waiting for my latest blood work, and I imagine I'm in the Anderson guest house as my ideal retreat in nature. And I hope my blood pressure goes down a little. So we're going to look at some Chinese and then Japanese paintings that show this hermitopia, this utopia of retreat into idealized nature. This is a 12th century painting by an artist Ma Yuan, the early 13th. And the only thing I really want to point out here is the twilight setting. This is this is not like it's a dirty old painting. This is dusk. And in fact, when we look at a detail, there's a party and there's candle stands and musicians and dancers, and it's the evening, and there's a party to celebrate the blossoming plums, which release their scent best in the evening. And so again, this nocturnal, twilight, magical setting when gardens, idealized landscapes come alive. And I love the Anderson garden at dusk best, as the tea house photo brings out. Other things that you do, so evening is the best time, or maybe dawn. So this is the quiet, this is not so much convivial with other people, but you and nature and deep, quiet sitting and listening. Again, the sonic, it's the music, not of human drummers and flutists and lute players, but the music of nature. So this is the painting. It was actually done right before the dynasty collapsed. 15 years after this painting was made, the Mongols took over China, and this we think is probably a stand-in for the emperor, or his ideal self. I want to get out to nature. I want to get away from my problems, and he had a lot of them, and connect with nature. And his head is turned towards us. We see his ear, and we imagine him listening to the sound of the stream, and of course the wind through the pines. The soughing of the wind through the pines. And how do we know there's a wind? Because vines are blowing. So if the vines are not hanging straight down, they're blowing, we know there's a wind. And we can see the pine boughs moving as well. And he's listening to that harmonious whoosh and tinkle of the stream and connecting deeply with it as a powerful escape from his problems. Here's another painting. It's a little more subtle. The scholar goes into nature. An emperor actually wrote a poem on the painting. I go into nature, the wildflowers dance. Your sleeves brush the plants, which then move, and that disturbs the birds, reclusive birds who make no sound, shun the presence of people and fly away. So it's really narrating this human experience of nature. He's going into nature to enjoy it. He's acknowledging he disturbs nature by his presence, but he's going to enjoy it by listening to and playing music. Because behind the scholar who pulls on his beard and looks into the void, the empty space, the diagonal of the willow, there is the servant who's carrying a zither. So we are not hearing the music, but we know it's going to be played. There's this moment of anticipation for the enjoyment which is going to come. And he's going to walk deep into nature, and there's the path, and this little branch is pulling us into the space. All right, and then now with that clue in mind, we look at what we might think of as generic Chinese landscape paintings. This is somebody named Yang playing the lute in landscape. This is the whole painting. They're preparing tea. He's over here with his antiquities, his hot tea and wine. He's playing the lute. Is he playing it is he the only sound in the painting? No. There's the pine trees with the wind. There's the stream. So these paintings are really very musical. So human connection with idealized nature through harmonizing with the sound of nature. I love music in gardens. I don't like taiko drums in gardens because it's not very harmonious with the sound of nature. And now I don't even need to talk about this. I mean, it's like I'm doing a concert, now you're all gonna sing along. He's sitting there, there's the servant carrying the lute, here's his friend playing the flute. And now you're looking for the sound of the wind and the sound of nature. So here's a famous painting, Tang Yin, 15th century, Ming Dynasty. We're taking it's beautiful autumn, like now. The weather, the humidity is cleared out. Your boatman is going to take a journey along a river. He's going to stop at a wine house. He's going to visit more friends at a little wine house here. He's going to sit in a pavilion there. But right in the middle, our scholar, hero of this painting, pulls out his flute, starts to play. His friend is come in a boat, is clapping his hands in the rhythm section, and our friend plays the flute, and he's kicking his foot back and forth in the cool water. And of course, they're harmonizing with each other, symbol of friendship, but we can hear the sound of the wind and the pine through the other plants, and of course, the sound of the waterfall. So these are all such common, this is what everybody associated with idealized nature, garden-like nature, harmonious relationships through music. Now, that's not everything. That would get rather boring if every painting was about the same thing. So let's look at other dimensions of this hermitopia, idealized nature space in Chinese and then Japanese painting. Let's see how I'm doing on my... Okay, so dwellings. Let's focus on the dwelling, because in many of these paintings, it's the architecture. It might seem pretty minimal. It's not a giant palace. It's not Versailles, some cathedral. It's a simple dwelling, but that dwelling is important. So dwelling in nature is part of the way that people define themselves. Now, they didn't really live in rustic cottages in nature like poor farmers or woodcutters. They lived in big villas in cities, but that was stressful. Anybody who owns a house knows that it's a money pit. It's always just fixing it. What do you need to repair now? What person is going to try and charge you an arm and a leg for something? So a lot of these paintings were about the fantasy, the necessary fantasy to escape into idealized nature, your vacation house, as it were. And this is a Chinese garden historian, painting historian, Anne Clapp, who writes that these paintings are really commemorative landscapes that celebrate a person, or maybe all of our better selves, the people we wish we could be, and they seek, they kind of express our achievements, our desire to be recognized for our better selves. It's a kind of disguised portrait in which our taste, our ambition, support of our peers is the goal. So the humanistic ideal of the recluse scholar is in the hermitage in nature. And so you just sit, this is what they call quiet sitting. You can sit there, you can enjoy nature, but you're really showing off your values. Some of this is social status, symbolism, but it's often very genuine at the same time. And lots of these paintings show the owner of the hermitage or his ideal hermitage just enjoying, sometimes just sleeping. I don't care about status or doing things, doing nothing, everything is done. And in this case, the name of the scholar's hermitage, which is written on the title of the painting, is the spring stream. And in fact, the person's name was Pei Chun Chuan, and Chun Chuan means spring stream. So the nickname of this scholarly gentleman, Spring Stream, was the name of his hermitage, and we can see the spring stream in the painting. It's a little bit of, well, I wanted to focus on this because I have the great pleasure tonight, as every year, staying in the Anderson guest house. I really asked Tim, can I give a lecture, because I want to stay in the Anderson guest house, truth be told. And as you walk into the guest house, the name of it in Japanese, Ando So, is written on the side, which is a kind of approximation of Anderson, and it means tranquil, peaceful dwelling pavilion. So, I mean, this whole idea of peaceful escape from nature into, my wife is shaking her head. Am I mistranslated? No, maybe she's dozing. I think that's correct, and tranquil dwelling pavilion. And so there's, to some degree, the association with the owner, the patron, or with all of our better selves. If we could build this, if we could live there, how happy we would be. And that's a very old tradition in East Asia, as I hope I've demonstrated. Other things that just, commonalities is, of course, they're drinking tea. So this is what's different from Japan, from China. In Japan, at least in chado, or the way of tea, chanoyu, the host makes the tea for the guest, who's cut off in this photo. But in China, the servant makes the tea, who brings it, and then the host serves it to the guest. But tea drinking in these rustic tea rooms is another connection between painting. So at a very basic level, yes, drinking, receiving tea, the humble enjoyment of simple tea in the idealized nature is a big theme. Okay, let's switch to Japan in our last 25 minutes. So, paintings in Japan often take these Chinese ideals of hermitopia, aesthetic reclusion, and make it their subject. And they kind of build on it, they evolve it, and they really emphasize connection between people and nature, and then how nature connects us to our better selves. Okay. Little bit of background, so I really want you to totally enjoy these paintings. So most of the next 20 minutes I'm going to talk about the subject, the architecture, what people are doing in the paintings, but I just want to point out a few basic things. Many, probably most Chinese and Japanese paintings have calligraphy of poems on top of the painting. And these are called poem painting scrolls. So I know we can all kind of read the painting, but we can't read the calligraphy, but I do want to point it out because it's important. So most basically, in East Asia, there's so-called 4 arts. Writing a prose essay, writing a poem, being able to do it in beautiful calligraphy, 3, and then being able to paint. And if you can't do all of those things, at least appreciating other people's ability to do them. So these paintings all bring out those so-called 4 arts. So we have an essay, we have poems, we have the calligraphy, the artistic writing that they're written in, and then we have the painting. And you've got to appreciate all of that. And it's no coincidence that over and over, nature is the subject. Nature is what brings out us as essay writers, that brings out us as poets. It inspires us as calligraphers and as painters. So that's the first idea, the poem, painting, essay, and calligraphy scrolls. These scrolls were done in social gatherings. Often monks are crowded into temples and other temples. They don't have beautiful gardens like the Anderson Garden. And so they just imagine the garden in their head and then have that imagined garden translated into a painting. So many monks would in their head have their ideal studio, in Japanese a shosai, and then they would have their friend picture their ideal studio. I live in a dorm, I have this kind of hectic, anxiety-filled life, but in my dreams I want to live in my studio under the pine, my bamboo studio, my plum grove studio. So you would have a party and you would invite your best friends over and they would write poems imagining they were in your studio. The lamp is casting shadows on the windows. I want to get there. The sound of the wind blending with the voice of somebody reading or reciting a poem through the night. How inspiring. So these are fantasies of escape into art and nature through ideal studios. And just here's more of them. Also, all of that writing, the essay, the poems, the beautiful calligraphy, the painting, and although it looks like it's landscape nature, down at the bottom there is the studio. This is the studio in the banana poems, which sound beautiful with summer rain pitter-pattering on them. And of course, these are just a few of the poems. Imagining that you're there. The night rain jolts the guests awake from their sleep. I'll be up the rest of the night knowing the sound of the rain hitting the banana plants, how special. So again, the sonic quality of nature and escape into it. Okay, and let's now look at these paintings from another angle. They give us good examples of how pavilions are situated over water. The still water with a stream, and it made me think of the the East Pond at Anderson Garden. There is the still stream with a few rocks in it. There's built right on the edge, and of course we all know there's a waterfall that flows right over to the side, similar to here. So lots of commonalities between paintings and Japanese gardens, Japanese style gardens, and this is really maybe an ideal studio here, a place where we imagine we could live. Also, of course, we're looking at the studio, but we imagine ourselves, like all of those poets, being there, having the experience, looking out to nature. And here I think of the round viewing pavilion by the West Waterfall back there, which we are now in this space and we're getting that vista out. Okay, the next part, and I'm getting towards the end of my lecture, which means we might have a lot of time for questions and answers and tests. Landscape as a supportive context for humanistic activities. This is a big difference between Chinese and Japanese paintings physically. Chinese paintings tended to be discrete scrolls, a vertical hanging scroll or a horizontal hand scroll that you would unroll. But they're small and they're just for one viewing. You unroll the painting and look at it. In Japan, they took the subject matter and the style, the empty space, the dramatic diagonal pine trees, the void, and they blew these paintings up into what we could call ambient works of art. They're part of the room all the time, like ambient music, elevator music. It's not wallpaper, it's not meant to not be looked at, but it creates a calm environment in which you live a happier, more tranquil life, because it's your idealized garden. You're living in some temple in the city, but you look at the walls. So these are giant wall panels, 6 feet tall, maybe 15 feet long. These are the door handles. So that's your hand is going to fit in there and slide open or close these panels. So this is the whole wall of a room. And we see that we're surrounded by hermitopia. There's the little pavilions, there's scholars gathered together, there's gentle flow of water, there's the wind through the pines, there's the music, the zither, this whole experience that we're now living in. Chinese didn't create these ambient wall paintings. Japanese did. I think in so much because they really wanted this hermitopia experience. They wanted to live with it. So the most specific example of this humanistic experience of living in and with nature is a subject called the Four Accomplishments. It's an old Chinese subject, much expanded on in Japan. And the four accomplishments were that well-educated, happy people did calligraphy. They did it and enjoyed to read it. The same with painting. Even if you couldn't paint, you could enjoy somebody else's painting. Art appreciation is the next best thing to doing it. You played chess or wei qi like Go, and of course music. So these paintings are not just generic escape into nature, but when we look carefully, down there in that rustic pavilion, he's enjoying a painting of nature. Now he has nature all around him, but he can better enjoy the nature around him when he sees it distilled into the several square feet of a painting. Or music. So this is the accomplishment of music. And of course, playing, this is actually a flute, and he has a zither, which he might bring out later, is you need somebody who appreciates the music. There's a famous story of a Chinese musician who is the greatest musician in the land, zither player, and when his best friend dies, he breaks his zither and says, "I'll never play again." And everybody says, "But you're such a great musician." And he says, "But I need a great listener. And without a great listener, why be a great musician?" And so the appreciation of music, you don't have to be a painter, a calligrapher, a poet, or a musician, but the desire to appreciate it is, I think, a big part of this message. So we see people looking at nature, we see people connecting with each other through these literary and musical arts. So this is a painting maybe by the artist Kendall Brown, probably not, in the Metropolitan Museum, of the Four Accomplishments. And in many cases, they're doing some of them. Here they're playing chess, or wei qi, or Go. But over here, the calligraphy books, and there's the zither unplayed. But you have the option to do these things. It's like your arsenal of tools that you can bring out when the moment strikes you. So it's the potential that nature awakens in us the potential for action. And that sense of potentiality, that's why I drew attention to, here are people arriving over the stream, the waterfall, again, the music of the water. They're moving into the painting. We're all in these paintings, there's people doing it, and then there's the state of becoming. We're entering into the world. We're going to join them. The pleasure is just around the corner. Here is the detail showing they're playing the chess. Here's a little servant boy who's fallen asleep. And there's the zither, the music part of the Four Accomplishments. There's the calligraphy book, a pen stand that's with no pen or brushes on it, going to be used for more calligraphy. So in these cases, the actual activities are downplayed. The books and the chin, the musical instrument is unused, but I think they're emphasizing the power of nature to awaken these interests, and what I'm also calling communitas, that doing these things in the natural setting brings us closer together. It's the friendships of these people that are being emphasized more than the activities. And here is the other side of that screen where there's the painting scroll, and he's not looking at the painting, he's looking at the waterfall. So the activities and the nature are sort of in a dynamic balance. This is a painting I saw just in June in Japan. Knowing I was going to give this lecture, I took some good photos of it, and this is from the Japanese label. You are looking at an imaginary landscape in China. Again, imagined, idealized nature. It's not a real place, it's not a time, it's a potential for what we could all want to do and be. And here is somebody coming. I don't know if they're delivering a package or not, but here's a servant arriving, that sense of movement and arrival. And then the two men are here leading that secluded life, what I've called hermitopia, enjoying art and literature with one's friends. Communitas, great label. They got all the major points. And what are they doing in nature? They're making a painting of nature. So they've so much internalized the world around them that they want to produce their own miniature version of it. Interestingly, the servant boy looks out a little grumpily, and often you'll see that as so just to review, hermitopia or aesthetic reclusion, there's the communitas, the friendship amongst like-minded people. They're doing it in nature. The enjoyment of nature is a critical component of it. They're eating and drinking. Remember the pots of wine and tea that the servants are, this servant is preparing the tea or the wine. This guy over here is bringing it to them. So you're eating and drinking. I had a Indian pale ale before this lecture, just to practice what I preach. It was very good. It's rustic. So this is that sense of, we know from tea aesthetics, you've heard John Powell lecture and Professor Brinji on Kokoro. So this is a rustic, a sew-on grass thatch tea style. So this is a fence with a even parallel top, a bamboo fence. Diagonal pines. You can hear the wind through them. So in addition to all of those things, I've added one more. It's leisurely, it's playful. You're not taking yourself too seriously. You might have noticed in these paintings there's old men, what they call gray beards, and then there's youth. People on both sides of it, not too many in middle age. The elderly and the very young, we can live in the worlds of play and fantasy. Career stress is behind us. And so we're kind of free the way that children are. And so a lot of these paintings, I really haven't pointed out much, there's the children who are not really paying attention. The little servant boys are asleep, they're putting their hand in the water. And one of the things, whenever I go to gardens, and the Anderson Garden chief amongst them, I watch people enjoying the garden. And I watch children looking at the fish, putting their hands in there, picking up a leaf, looking at their reflection, in that sense of fantasy. They're not reading the pamphlet. They're not thinking, is it worth the money I paid, or what's my next engagement? And I think these paintings really bring out that sense of playful, leisurely, kind of abandon yourself. And I just want to bring some other photos of Anderson Garden children at play. So I think that we do a lot of these things in gardens, and the Anderson Garden does it. In your Japanese festival, you have a wonderful calligrapher who comes over and does calligraphy kind of in the garden. One could certainly build on that. You don't have to do Japanese calligraphy. You could write poems and in the garden, be inspired by it to create. So build on what you already do. I want to, before these slides are a little out of order, but again, this is just showing that environment. So this is a Japanese Zen temple, Daitokuji Jukoin temple. This is the abbot's the head priest's, the owner's house. And he has 3 rooms in front, B, C, and D on the diagram. This is room D to the left. And this is the theme of the 4 accomplishments on the walls. And you can really see now with the Tommy Metz, this is ambient, this is bodily engagement. When you're in this room, sitting, sleeping, that you become part of the world. This is the 4 accomplishments, we'll just go through them. There's looking at paintings, we move, there's the servant, we're crossing a bridge, we move into another part of the garden-like nature, we read calligraphy with our friends out loud, the music of the recitation, the poem reading. We move to the next wall. There's wine being prepared. They're playing Go or Weiqi or chess over here. And then we have just a guy boating. He's not doing any of the 4 accomplishments. He's just floating in a boat, enjoying the cool summer breeze. And we end with the music. And the listener is just as important as the musician. They both need each other. And I think one of the wonderful things about the Anderson Garden is you have your Tuesday night summer concerts, and you have some other concerts as well. I know you've had in the past in other parts of the garden. And that sense of bringing music, especially, acoustic and wind instruments, not taiko, into the garden. So you're doing a lot. You're doing at least half of these 4 accomplishments: the calligraphy and the music. Maybe you can integrate them a little more. I think we have some of our own, and these 4 accomplishments can be evolved. They don't need to be a absolute, sort of locked into place, but it is exercise, its own kind of. I think we have a Tai Chi teacher here that very much in China, Tai Chi, near nature, in nature. I mean, I know this is a very staged yoga-esque photo, but could we use garden for, wise, harmonious physical movements? I think we can build our own accomplishments, or maybe ritual. We are often losing ritual in our society, often wedding rituals, memorial service rituals. Could we create new accomplishments, maybe music, art, exercise, ritual, as we kind of evolve what we do in gardens? And I think the Anderson is doing a lot of these. So I'm going to move from the 4 accomplishments back to sort of humans in nature, the place for the quiet sitting, the place for the contemplation, and you guys do this. This is why my asterisk, deepening what you already know, what you already do. we could really think, serenity, self-awareness, meditation by being in nature. Remember his dynasty that his family had run for 300 years collapses 15 years after the painting was made. And I know tea is a big, Chado or Chano Yu tea is a very big aspect of recent programming at Anderson. And I saw a quote, actually Professor Gunji said this a few years ago, so I looked it up. This is the 7th master of the Urasenke school of tea, Joshinsai Sosa, in the middle, early 18th century, who when asked, how would you define kokoro, heart, spirit, presence of mind and body, he said, if I were to tell you what is Chano Yu, if asked what is Chano Yu, I would say it is the voice of the wind in the pines painted with ink on a scroll. So that seemed to sort of bring together. So people have always known these things. We've kind of lost some of them, and it's a very good time and place to bring them back. Now you might be saying, but I like to drink on those concerts in the garden. Is that okay? Is that sanctioned by painting history? It is. So there's paintings of the 7 immortals of the wine cup, 7 great drinkers in Chinese society. Actually, this is Confucius and Buddha and Lao Tzu, who are all drinking wine that is turned to vinegar. And despite their different views of doctrine, they all think wine that's too old is turned to vinegar. So they all taste the same thing. But the idea of drinking and certainly enjoying getting a little tipsy in idealized nature is really, these women are doing something that's sanctioned by East Asian painting history. Or, I walked around the garden today and there were 2 young women doing sort of what I think of as cheesecake photos. I don't know what they're called now. Glamour shots in gardens. Is that sanctioned by painting history? It is. This is an artist from the 16th century, Kaiho Yusho, who does, this is the 4 accomplishments. Now the calligraphy books aren't being read. The zither is going to be maybe unwrapped and played or not. The other screen over here shows the 2 others, but we don't really care about those gentlemanly accomplishments. It's the beautiful Chinese Tang Dynasty style court ladies draping themselves around the trees. And I like how her color picked up nicely on the one in the painting. So these other sensual enjoyments of beautiful people and beautiful nature is also something that people have understood and embraced for a long time. Or, of course, so these are learned activities, and some of them may be innate. And obviously, in addition to a culturated appreciation of idealized nature, whether a garden or a Chinese, Japanese painting, some things are just innate. When we sit at the bottom of a waterfall, we feel these negative ions which change our brain chemistry and make us happy. And people have always noted that and been drawn to the base of waterfalls. I don't think that's learned, that's a biological thing, but certainly when you look at gardens and you look at paintings of nature, that's brought out. So in my conclusion, I enjoyed learning and bringing together my peanut butter and chocolate, my painting historian, art historian, and garden historian into this lecture. And I bring out the Anderson logo here, which we could translate many ways, but perhaps most basically is I learn only to be content, or learning is enough for happiness in life. And I think gardens and art, to me, have always been an inexhaustible sense of pleasure. So I hope a little of that has come through in this lecture. Thank you. Talk about innate knowledge, 7:55. Just more like that after 30 years in the classroom, which leaves us like 5-10 minutes for questions, comments.
I have 2 questions, Ken. The first is scaling. On a couple of the paintings, the main figure was quite large, and then there was a smaller figure, often a servant. And so what was the significance of scaling?
So there is a kind of hierarchy. So we basically have older men for the most part. We have servants, because this is an idealized world where you want to have servants, bring you the food and heat the wine, and bring the paintings out to you where you can unroll them and look at them in nature, and then somebody has to take them away to. So they're the sort of middle size, and then the children. So, and the only people who are kind of middle and working are those servants. So in a way, it gives us like youth, and it gives us work, and it gives us retired, leisure, in 3 levels of, you know, youth, 3 ages and 3 sizes. I think it's a very astute point, and there is a sort of hierarchy. You know, the old graybeards are the top of the food chain.
I fit in there at least. And the second question was, most of the paintings are monochromatic. Was that a statement of technology, of aesthetics, or of the
Aesthetics. So certainly I showed you that one painting at the beginning, Gardens of Status in Place, that was really brightly
Right.
mineral pigment, and they obviously had mineral pigments. That's associated with Japanese classical literature, landscape coming from Chinese monochrome. So why did Chinese paint in monochrome and not color? They had mineral pigments, which were very expensive and sometimes used them, but ink monochrome allows you to have greater texture and volume and a certain kind of calligraphic expressiveness of the brush, which it's hard to see in slides. It'd be much easier to look at. And so that's a kind of truer reality. The beauty of, I mean, I think, how many people have watched the movie Casablanca? You know, in addition to Bogey and Ingrid Bergman and the drama, I mean, it's just beautiful grays, darks. All the good guys wear white and cream colored. All the bad guys wear gray and black. And I mean, it uses, you know, Chinese say within the shades of gray are all the colors of the world. And they really mean we're attuned to gradations and tones. It's not the bright, jarring colors. So there's a kind of subtle aesthetic of subtlety and expressiveness that comes out in the ink. And the last part, in Japan, ink monochrome is associated with Chineseness. And since this is all Chinese cultural fantasy, it's appropriate to do it in ink monochrome. Good questions. Any other questions or comments? Yes?
If emperors and rulers were so obsessed with the idea of like hermitopia and they had power, then why didn't they just do what they imagined?
They did, to a degree. They built gardens and tea houses, but that's the real world. You know, the painting is like fiction. So you can do anything you want in painting. So they actually did these things, and a really astute question. So people in power created these paintings, but people out, well, at least my thesis in my book on the subject, people out of power could also just have a painting. So the people in power had a big garden, but they were maybe criticized for showing off their status. Look how big, look at how many gardeners they have. But they then had a painting that shows Chinese hermits doing it. And I think their message was, I'm not about power, I'm about escape. I'm about the fantasy, I want to be a hermit. And you can trust me as a ruler, because I mean, imagine if Donald Trump didn't have Mar-a-Lago, but he had a little tea house. We'd probably trust him, or at least some people would more. See, he's not a megalomaniac, he wants to be a hermit. I mean, that's really, I don't mean that facetiously, that was part of the message. But also people out of power, they couldn't afford a giant garden palace, but they could afford a painting. And that could express their values. So I argued in my dissertation, my first book, that people out of power and in power both could use these images, which is why they were so common. My professors in Japan said, well, they were common because they were painted a lot. And I said, why were they painted a lot? And they said, idiot, because they were common. I said, but that's circular reason. But I think it was really because people both in and out of power could interpret these differently. So they were very open signifiers in fancy academic language, could mean whatever the audience wanted them to mean. Excellent question. Okay, other questions or comments? Yes. You in the back.
Yeah, the integration of these artistic concepts into gardens, in your experience looking at Japanese gardens all over the world, you know, how common is that? How
So are these separate worlds? Like I've kept painting history, they're really integrated. I mean, stupid me for not. So you're in one of those Japanese temple gardens, you're looking at the Chinese hermitopia on your walls, and you open the other door and you're looking at your creation of it. Often in kind of miniature form, because you're in a big crowded temple, and you don't have 15 acres, but they are integrating them. So they're going into the garden, they're doing it, but then they get inspired or retreat into the visual, the fantasy, the fiction of it. So I think they really were integrated. And you know, one inspired the other, so it was a kind of loop, feedback loop between them. And in fact, in the NAJGA, North American Japanese Garden Association Journal, Ken Lam, a painter, a Chinese-style ink painter, and a garden maker, somebody who does both of them, wrote an article on how actual garden design, how you arrange the stones and pine trees, was probably inspired by the gardens. And in fact, Mark, excellent question. My oldest friend from 7th and 8th grade in the back there. I didn't plant these questions. But I probably should have, but happily he asked a great question. And a number of the attributed, who designed gardens in medieval Japan, they're often attributed to landscape painters, which is another like, yeah, of course. The person who could create this arrangement in 2 dimensions, why couldn't they do it in 3? Art historians and garden historians have always sort of poo-pooed that. Oh, those are just legendary attributions to big names. But it makes perfect sense. And so increasingly we now think that these famous landscape painters, Soami, Seshu, were in fact garden designers. Because again, in composition and in sort of content, they're dealing with the same things.
I'm just putting a couple things together in my mind, because what you said about people could aspire to that, was that that must have been a sort of fact about Chinese culture that was kind of well known in European culture in the 19th century. Else how did Verdi know to have Ping Pang and Pong, right, have the singing about wanting to retire to the garden?
Yeah.
And this idealized garden.
Voltaire said that, who saw some Chinese paintings that were like chinoiserie on lacquer and furniture that were taken to Europe, looking at these hermitopia paintings. Very glad, Pink Floyd, that I should have thought of that term years ago. Kick myself that I didn't. Is that Europeans, right, the 18th century encyclopedists and the Enlightenment philosophers were very influenced by this fantasy of China. But again, just to that point, though, people in power who had really grabbed power, kind of viciously, could claim, oh no, my heart really is as a hermit in nature. That's what I want to be. And people out of power can say, I don't have power, I don't want it. I'm living the life of the hermit that I really want to be in retirement, as a kind of way of, assuaging their feelings of anxiety of having lost power. So, and in Europe, it also spoke to people very deeply. Excellent question. Wow. Rockford audiences.
So the style of Japanese gardens evolved over the centuries. Did the style of the Japanese garden paintings precede, precede, or?
So most of the paintings I showed you are 15th, 16th century, but it becomes a very kind of almost like classical style that gets repeated into the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century. But most of what I showed you is 15th, 16th century, the Chinese ones and the Japanese ones. The Japanese were obviously collected Chinese paintings. I shouldn't, but they collected them. Many of those famous Chinese paintings were in Japanese temple and warlord collections, 14th, 15th, 16th century. They copied them, and then arguably they inspired the gardens. And even as garden styles evolved, so a tea garden, oroji, isn't really like this at all, but big daimyo gardens had elements of this. Any other questions, comments? All right, then we'll see how the bears are doing.